The Galactic Empire had ruled for millennia, its grip on the cosmos unchallenged. Countless civilizations had bowed before its might, their homeworlds either subjugated or erased. There was no enemy they feared, no war they had ever truly lost. The Empire's doctrine was clear: dominance through overwhelming force, submission through absolute power. No species had ever resisted and survived. When the first reports of humanity reached the Imperial Council, they barely warranted a mention. A primitive species, new to the stars, still bound by the limitations of their biology. They had clawed their way into space with technology that seemed almost laughable. Their warships were crude, lacking the elegance of the Empire's fleets. Their armies relied on outdated kinetic weapons, a technology long abandoned by the more civilized races of the galaxy. To the Empire, they were nothing more than an inconvenience, another minor obstacle to be swept aside. A single scouting fleet had been dispatched to evaluate their progress. What they found only reinforced the Council's beliefs: humans were weak, disorganized, and tragically overconfident. Their ships, though numerous, were fragile compared to the layered energy shielding of Imperial vessels. Their strategies were archaic, their systems lacking the efficiency of the great galactic powers. The report was filed, the verdict clear: humanity would be no challenge. They were not worthy of diplomacy, nor were they deserving of an offer of peaceful annexation. Their fate was inevitable. It was not long before an official demand was sent. The message, delivered in the language of their choosing, was simple: surrender all military assets, acknowledge imperial rule, and submit to occupation, or face extermination. It was the same offer that had been made to 100 species before them. Those that accepted lived under the Empire's rule, reduced to servitude, their cultures erased over time. Those that refused were systematically purged from existence, their worlds turned into lifeless husks. It was a system that had never failed. But then, something unprecedented happened. The humans did not comply. They did not negotiate. They did not beg for terms or attempt to stall. The response that came was short, direct, and utterly defiant. The Council had not expected that. Even the warlike species that had resisted in the past had done so with caution, attempting to barter for survival even as they took up arms. But this was outright mockery. The Empire had crushed fleets 10 times stronger, civilizations thousands of years older. And yet these humans, this insignificant race from the fringes of the galaxy, dared to challenge them. Laughter erupted in the chambers of the Council as the message was read aloud. The arrogance of these creatures was almost admirable in its stupidity. The war was decided before it had even begun. The only thing left to determine was the method of their destruction. Some members argued that a prolonged campaign would be wasteful. Humanity was not worthy of the effort. Others suggested total orbital bombardment, glass their worlds, eradicate their presence, and let the ruins serve as a warning to others. In the end, a compromise was reached. A single battle fleet would be sent, a fraction of the Empire's true strength, yet more than enough to obliterate any resistance. It would be a demonstration, nothing more. The humans would either fall in line after witnessing the futility of resistance, or they would perish in fire. The fleet assigned to this task was not the largest, but it was experienced, led by Admiral Xylan, a veteran of dozens of conquests, a tactician who had never once suffered a loss. His orders were clear: subjugation or extermination. As the fleet prepared for departure, the news of humanity's defiance spread. Across the Empire, the reaction was the same: amusement, condescension, and a sense of inevitability. The great war machine of the Empire was unstoppable, its fleets unchallenged, its soldiers unmatched. This was not a battle, it was an execution. In a matter of days, the Imperial fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system. Thousands of warships, each one capable of reducing entire continents to ash, emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. Their sensors swept the system, analyzing planetary defenses, fleet positions, and points of interest. Their calculations were cold and efficient. Humanity's defenses would not last more than a few hours. Admiral Xylan stood aboard the bridge of his flagship, observing the data feed as it streamed in. His expression was one of detached boredom. He had seen this scenario play out too many times before. The enemy would scramble their forces, attempt a last stand, and ultimately break under the might of the Empire. It was always the same. The names of the species changed, the coordinates shifted, but the result was inevitable. A final transmission was sent to Earth, giving them one last opportunity to surrender. Silence followed. Then, a single reply came through. Xylan exhaled through his nostrils, shaking his head. How predictable! How utterly foolish! There would be no negotiations. No quarter. The order was given. The Imperial fleet surged forward, engines burning bright against the void. Weapons powered up, targeting solutions locked in. The battle would be over before the humans even realized they had lost. Victory was assured. Or so they believed. The Imperial fleet advanced with unwavering confidence, their warships forming precise formations as they moved deeper into the system. Their commanders had studied countless battles, their strategies refined through centuries of conquest. They had encountered nothing that could challenge their might, and they did not expect this time to be any different. Humanity's resistance was expected to be brief, a formality before the inevitable. Initial scans confirmed the expected numbers. Human ships were present, but they were outgunned, outmatched, and outclassed in every conceivable way. The Empire's vessels boasted shields that could withstand relentless bombardment, energy weapons capable of reducing enemy ships to molten scrap in a single volley, and electronic warfare systems that could disrupt enemy communications and targeting. Their capital ships, enormous and imposing, moved into position with calculated precision, ready to unleash their firepower. The fleet's forward scouts reported no immediate response from the human forces. There was no panic, no desperate retreat, no reckless counterattack. Instead, the human fleet remained in a seemingly defensive stance near their homeworld, their formations holding steady. It was unusual, but not concerning. Some species had attempted psychological tactics before, deliberate silence to create the illusion of control. It had never worked. The first engagement was initiated with overwhelming force. A barrage of long-range energy weapons streaked through space, targeting the outermost human vessels. The blasts struck their hulls, and as expected, their shielding was weak in comparison. Several ships were crippled immediately, their metal plating melting away under the intense heat. The Empire's confidence grew. They were breaking already. Then, the human fleet moved. What had initially seemed like a standard defensive posture rapidly shifted into something more precise, more deliberate. Smaller human vessels darted through the battlefield at high velocities, their thrusters burning with unexpected agility. They weaved through the engagement zone, avoiding direct hits with an efficiency that defied the Empire's calculations. Their patterns were unpredictable, their movements too precise to be random. The larger human ships did not attempt to return fire immediately. They adjusted their positions, forming a new battle line, creating layered defensive positions that forced the Imperial ships to engage at awkward angles. Something was wrong. Admiral Xylan watched as his fleet continued its bombardment. More human ships were destroyed, but something about their response was unsettling. They weren't scrambling chaotically like so many species before them. Their formations adjusted in real time, their vessels coordinating at a level that suggested something far beyond primitive tactics. They were absorbing damage where they had to, sacrificing lesser ships to protect more valuable assets, and forcing the Empire into specific engagement zones. A sudden disturbance rippled through the Empire's formation. Dozens of human ships broke away from the main force, surging forward with precise acceleration. At first, they appeared to be attempting a suicidal charge, an act of desperation. The Imperial fleet prepared to intercept, their weapons locking onto the advancing vessels. The moment they fired, the battlefield shifted again. The human ships abruptly changed vectors, dodging the incoming fire with impossible accuracy. Then they struck. Kinetic rounds tore through the Imperial fleet's outer formations, moving at relativistic speeds that bypassed energy shielding entirely. The projectiles slammed into hulls, piercing through armor, igniting internal systems and catastrophic explosions. The kinetic impacts sent massive ships spiraling out of control, their structural integrity shattered in an instant. Before the Empire could react, the second wave hit. Human missile barrages streaked through space, each warhead splitting into dozens of smaller payloads that adjusted course mid-flight. They targeted engines, sensor arrays, weapon batteries, disabling key systems with brutal efficiency. The Empire's defensive countermeasures struggled to adapt, their targeting algorithms unable to compensate for the sheer unpredictability of human weaponry. The battle, which should have been over in minutes, was spiraling into chaos. Xylan's orders were immediate: tighten formations, focus fire, eliminate priority targets. The fleet adapted, shifting its tactics, bringing heavier warships to the front. Their firepower increased tenfold, and for a moment the tide seemed to turn. More human vessels fell, their defenses buckling under the concentrated assault. The Empire's forces pressed forward, determined to crush the resistance before it could escalate further. But then came the third wave. Humanity had not deployed all of its forces at once. The first engagements had been tests, probes to analyze the Empire's response, to study their attack patterns and vulnerabilities. Now, with that data collected, they struck with full force. Warships that had remained hidden within asteroid fields and planetary shadows emerged, their weapons already locked on. Hidden missile silos on planetary bodies fired in unison, filling the void with a relentless storm of projectiles. Electronic warfare systems activated, disrupting the Empire's targeting systems, jamming communications, and corrupting navigational data. The Empire's formations faltered. For the first time in the fleet's history, panic spread among the officers. Their ships, designed for overwhelming frontal engagements, were being torn apart by a force that fought with an entirely different doctrine. Humanity did not engage in direct confrontations unless it was on their terms. They did not fight wars of attrition, nor did they seek to overwhelm by numbers alone. Their tactics were brutal, efficient, and adaptive. More ships were lost. The Empire's forces attempted to regroup, but every maneuver was countered. Human vessels moved in coordinated strikes, targeting the Empire's command ships, breaking supply chains, isolating squadrons. The larger capital ships, which had once been symbols of indomitable strength, were now massive, vulnerable targets unable to keep up with the relentless speed and precision of human warfare. Xylan's flagship came under direct attack. Warning sirens blared as kinetic slugs ripped through its outer hull, bypassing shields as if they were non-existent. Fires erupted across multiple decks, crew members scrambling to contain the damage. The Admiral gritted his teeth, refusing to acknowledge the possibility forming in his mind. They were losing. A new transmission came through, cutting through the chaos of battle. A human voice, steady and unwavering, spoke directly to the Imperial command. "This is not your empire. This is not your war. You came here believing you were unstoppable. Now you leave knowing you were wrong." It was not a demand. It was not a plea. It was a statement of fact. The fleet's losses had reached catastrophic levels. What had begun as a display of dominance had become a desperate struggle for survival. Xylan's mind raced for solutions, but none remained. They had underestimated humanity in every possible way. Their technology was not primitive, it was different. Their weapons were not outdated, they were perfected for war. Their strategies were not reckless, they were calculated. For the first time in its history, the Empire's forces faced an enemy that did not fear them. An enemy that fought not for conquest, but for survival. An enemy that did not surrender. And they were losing. The Imperial fleet was in shambles. What had started as a calculated display of overwhelming force had transformed into a brutal, uncontrollable battle. Ships burned in the void, their hulls shattered, their once impenetrable formations now fractured. The battlefield, once dominated by the disciplined structure of the Empire's war machine, had devolved into chaos. Admiral Xylan stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the wreckage forming around them. He had never seen an enemy dismantle an Imperial fleet with such precision. Every attempt to reform their lines had been countered before it could even take shape. Every effort to coordinate a counteroffensive was disrupted by targeted strikes against command ships and communication hubs. The enemy was inside their network, jamming transmissions, intercepting orders, corrupting navigation systems. What had once been their greatest strength, their ability to control vast engagements with precision, was now a vulnerability, turned against them by an enemy who had prepared for every contingency. The ships that still remained operational fought with increasing desperation. Damage reports flooded in from all sectors, engines failing, ammunition depleted, shields collapsing under relentless kinetic bombardment. Entire squadrons were lost without a trace, their signals vanishing as they were picked apart by coordinated human attacks. Then came the worst realization of all: retreat was no longer an option. The hyperspace lanes they had used to enter the system were now compromised. Somehow, humanity had calculated their precise exit vectors and deployed interdiction fields, preventing any attempt to escape. These were not standard gravity wells or brute force distortions. They were targeted disruptions, surgically placed, forcing the fleet to stay within the kill zone. Every maneuver was countered, every path to safety cut off. Xylan's mind raced for alternatives. The fleet had never prepared for a scenario in which they would be forced to fight to the last ship. That was something only lesser species endured. The Empire had always fought on its terms, dictating every engagement, ensuring victory before the first shot was fired. But this war was not following the rules they had written. Humanity was waging battle with an entirely different philosophy, one that the Empire had never encountered. They did not fight to intimidate. They did not seek surrender. They fought to annihilate. Another explosion rocked the flagship as incoming rounds tore through the lower decks. The damage reports were catastrophic, engineering compromised, weapons systems failing. Xylan clenched his fists, forcing himself to think past the fear gripping his officers. There had to be a way to break free. He turned to his remaining commanders, issuing new orders: regroup whatever forces they could, concentrate fire on the enemy command ships, find a weak point. If they could disable the human fleet's coordination, they might still salvage something. The response he received chilled him to the core. There is no weak point, Admiral. They have no center. Their command is distributed. For the first time, he understood. Humanity's strength was not in numbers, nor in raw firepower, but in the way they fought. Unlike the Empire, which relied on hierarchical chains of command, humanity had adapted their warfare to be fluid, independent, unpredictable. Each ship, each squadron, operated with its own objectives while still contributing to the larger battle. Removing one leader did nothing to hinder their effectiveness. Striking a single target did not slow them down, it only redirected their fury. Another wave of missiles tore through the remnants of the Imperial fleet. The humans were no longer just disabling ships, they were ensuring total destruction. There were no distress signals, no survivors left floating in escape pods. Every vessel crippled beyond repair was finished off without hesitation. There was no offer of surrender. There were no negotiations. Xylan felt a deep, unfamiliar sensation clawing at the edges of his thoughts: dread. The Empire had always been the predator. They had never known what it was like to be hunted. But now they were prey, caught in the jaws of something far worse than they had ever imagined. The humans did not celebrate their victories. There were no taunts, no messages of triumph. They fought with brutal efficiency, with a singular purpose. Every action, every maneuver, was calculated to maximize destruction. They had analyzed the Empire's tactics, dissected their weaknesses, and exploited them with merciless precision. Another officer turned to Xylan, fear visible even through the rigid discipline of Imperial protocol. "Sir, what are your orders?" He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. What orders could he give? The battle was lost. The fleet was being wiped from existence. There was no reinforcement fleet waiting to turn the tide. No contingency plan for this level of defeat. For the first time in his life, Admiral Xylan had no answer. Then, a final transmission came through. Not a demand. Not a warning. Just a cold, matter-of-fact statement. The Empire falls today. Not in fire. Not in conquest. But in fear. You are no longer the strongest. You are no longer the rulers of this galaxy. You are the past. The transmission ended, and the final assault began. The last of the Imperial ships, those still able to fight, attempted one final, desperate push. It was not a strategic maneuver. It was not an attempt to turn the battle. It was pure instinct, survival at any cost. But survival was no longer an option. The human fleet closed in, their weapons systems calculating every trajectory, every possible escape route, ensuring that none would leave. Kinetic slugs ripped through command centers, obliterating any remaining semblance of control. Torpedoes shattered warships that had once been the pride of the Empire. The void was filled with wreckage, drifting lifelessly, a graveyard of arrogance and failure. Xylan stood frozen as the final breach alarms echoed through the bridge. His flagship, once the symbol of Imperial supremacy, was now nothing more than a target awaiting execution. Flames consumed the corridors, the screams of his crew fading into static as systems failed one by one. The Empire had come expecting to conquer. They had believed themselves invincible. They had seen humanity as nothing more than another obstacle to be swept aside. Now they understood the truth. Humanity was not a mere civilization. They were not a species that could be intimidated, pacified, or assimilated. They were something else entirely. Something the Empire had never encountered. Something they had no defense against. The last thing Admiral Xylan saw before everything went dark was the incoming barrage, an unrelenting storm of firepower, precise, devastating, merciless. Then silence. The wreckage of the Imperial fleet drifted through the void, silent and lifeless. What had once been a symbol of galactic dominance was now reduced to twisted metal, broken hulls, and fading energy signatures. The battle was over, but the war had only just begun. Humanity did not linger. There were no celebrations, no declarations of victory. The surviving warships methodically scanned the battlefield, confirming the destruction of every last Imperial vessel. There was no mercy, no rescue of stranded enemy officers. Any remaining life signs within the wreckage were systematically eliminated. The Imperials had come as conquerors, believing themselves invincible. Now they were nothing more than debris floating in space. Human fleets did not waste time gloating. Their mission was not about proving superiority. It was about ensuring that the Empire never posed a threat again. While combat vessels completed their purge, other ships moved with precise coordination, deploying long-range probes and sensor arrays. They were not just analyzing the aftermath. They were preparing for the next step. The Empire had made a fatal mistake in assuming this was a single battle. To them, war had always been about demonstrations of force, about overwhelming an enemy until their will to resist was broken. They had never faced an opponent that did not break. Humanity did not simply resist. They adapted, they evolved, and they ensured that no enemy could ever threaten them twice. The data collected from the battle was instantly processed by advanced tactical networks. Every Imperial weakness, every technological flaw, every strategic vulnerability was catalogued, dissected, and integrated into new war plans. Humanity did not just defeat their enemies. They studied them, consumed their knowledge, and transformed it into a weapon for future battles. They had taken the Empire's best and reduced it to nothing. Now they were preparing to do the same to everything the Empire had ever built. At the edges of the system, additional human fleets arrived in formation. These were not just warships, but logistical support vessels, supply convoys, and planetary occupation forces. Humanity did not believe in leaving enemies wounded. They struck to kill, and they would not stop until every last remnant of the Empire's rule was erased. The first phase was already in motion. Cyber warfare teams launched coordinated assaults against the Empire's remaining communications networks. Data centers, relay stations, and encrypted command channels were compromised in minutes. The Empire, for all its technological superiority, had never faced an enemy willing to wage total war across every domain. Their networks were designed for control, not defense. Now, that control was slipping from their grasp. Across the Empire's core systems, confusion spread like wildfire. Fleet commanders who had once believed they were invulnerable were met with silence from their high command. Defensive grids faltered as their automated systems failed, turned against them by the very technology they had relied upon. Planetary governors issued frantic orders, demanding reinforcements that would never come. The destruction of a single fleet would not have been enough to shake the Empire. They had lost battles before, but they had always rebuilt, always crushed any rebellion that dared to rise against them. But this was different. This was not an isolated defeat. This was the beginning of something far worse. The Empire had relied on fear to maintain control. For centuries, their fleets had been the ultimate enforcers, ensuring that no species, no civilization, ever dared to challenge their rule. But fear only worked when the threat remained. Now that threat was gone. The moment the news of the fleet's annihilation spread, everything changed. Worlds that had once submitted to imperial rule out of terror now saw a chance for rebellion. Species long oppressed, forced into servitude, began rising up in defiance. The Empire's rule had been absolute because no one had ever survived defying it. Now, humanity had done more than survive. They had utterly destroyed the most powerful armada the Empire had ever assembled. The flames of resistance ignited across the galaxy. Uprisings erupted on dozens of worlds, each one emboldened by the knowledge that the Empire was not untouchable. Their fleets were not invincible. Their power was not eternal. But rebellion alone was not enough. Without coordination, without leadership, these scattered revolts would eventually be crushed. The Empire had always known how to deal with unrest, divide, isolate, and exterminate. That was their way. But humanity was already a step ahead. Encrypted transmissions spread through the underground networks of countless worlds. These were not messages of hope or empty promises of freedom. They were directives, strategic guidance, military coordination, supply routes, and hidden weapons caches. Humanity did not just inspire resistance. They organized it, transformed it into something more than just scattered defiance. Across the Empire's territories, strategic targets began to fall. Shipyards were sabotaged, manufacturing plants destroyed, supply lines severed. Imperial forces, already stretched thin trying to contain the growing chaos, found themselves overwhelmed. Their forces were powerful, but they had never been forced to fight everywhere at once. Humanity did not send diplomats. They did not negotiate. They did not offer the Empire a chance to surrender. They had seen what the Empire did to those who showed weakness. They understood the only language the Empire truly respected: total and absolute destruction. The final phase of the operation was already in motion. While the Empire struggled to maintain control, human fleets prepared for the next assault. The loss of one battle would not break an empire, but the loss of every battle, every fleet, every world, that would shatter them beyond repair. The humans had already chosen their next targets. Key military outposts, strategic resource hubs, command centers, every critical point of infrastructure the Empire relied upon to wage war was marked for destruction. The war would not be fought on imperial terms. It would not be drawn out into years of attrition. Humanity had no interest in waiting. They would end the Empire before it could even comprehend what was happening. As the human fleet moved out, their warships silent and methodical, they left nothing behind. No prisoners. No warnings. No mercy. The Empire had made its choice the moment it sought to conquer humanity. Now, humanity was making theirs. And their choice was extinction. The Empire had spent centuries building its dominion, subjugating entire species, extinguishing resistance before it could take root. Its rule was absolute, enforced by fleets so vast and powerful that the very idea of defiance had been reduced to nothing more than a distant memory. But that illusion had been shattered. Word of the Empire's catastrophic defeat spread across the galaxy at an uncontrollable pace. No amount of censorship, no desperate proclamations from the imperial leadership, could contain the reality of what had happened. Their most powerful fleet had been eradicated in a single battle. Their admirals, their greatest tacticians, had been outmaneuvered, their strategies exposed and dismantled with surgical precision. The invincible war machine they had spent eons perfecting had been torn apart in mere hours. Entire sectors fell into chaos. Imperial garrisons, once feared as unbreakable enforcers of order, found themselves besieged. What had begun as isolated uprisings escalated into full-scale insurrections. Resistance groups that had once operated in the shadows now openly seized control of planetary capitals. Supply convoys vanished, warships refused to answer commands, entire systems cut ties with the Imperial chain of command. But this was not an organic revolution. This was not the slow, uncertain process of rebellion taking shape over decades. It was something far more precise, far more controlled. Every act of defiance, every strike against the Empire's infrastructure, had been guided by unseen hands. Humanity had ensured that these revolts were not disorganized or reactionary. They were coordinated, calculated, and devastatingly effective. The Imperial leadership had no countermeasure. Their governance relied on centralization, on control through strict hierarchy. Their empire was not built to withstand disruption at every level. The humans understood this and struck accordingly. Command structures collapsed. Planetary governors, cut off from support, were either overthrown or executed. Military officers, witnessing the complete disintegration of the systems they had sworn to uphold, either defected or fell into paralyzed inaction. The Empire, once the supreme force of the galaxy, was disintegrating from within. And the humans had only just begun. In the void of space, the next wave of human fleets arrived in system. Their warships were not just hunting remnants of the Imperial Navy, they were delivering the final blows to cripple the Empire's very foundations. Strategic bombardments commenced with mechanical precision. Orbital defense grids were deactivated or turned against their former masters. Government facilities, shipyards, and critical supply hubs were systematically wiped out. Every command center, every administrative structure, every symbol of imperial authority was targeted and eliminated with ruthless efficiency. There was no pause, no negotiation. The humans did not arrive as liberators or conquerors. They did not seek to rule in place of the Empire. They sought only to destroy it. For those still loyal to the imperial order, there was no retreat. There was no fortified stronghold to regroup. Every safe haven they had built, every fallback position they had planned, was already under attack. Their war doctrine, built around the assumption that no enemy could truly challenge them, had left them completely unprepared for an opponent who had no intention of allowing them to recover. On the throne world of the Empire, the panic was no longer hidden. The grand halls of imperial leadership, once filled with unwavering confidence, now echoed with desperate arguments, frantic strategies, last-ditch efforts to maintain control. None of it mattered. The systems that had sustained them for so long were already collapsing. The Emperor himself, the figure who had ruled over this vast dominion with unquestionable authority, found himself facing an unthinkable reality. His armies were gone. His fleets were shattered. His commands, once absolute, now carried no weight. The very foundation of his reign, the fear that had held the galaxy in submission, had vanished. He understood, in his final moments, that this was not just a military defeat. It was the death of the Empire itself. Humanity's war was not one of conquest or expansion. It was a war of extermination. They had not come to negotiate a new galactic order. They had come to erase the old one. And they succeeded. As the last remnants of imperial control crumbled, the galaxy entered a new era. But it was not one of celebration. There were no grand declarations of victory. No monuments built in honor of the fallen. Humanity did not seek recognition, did not claim dominion over the ruins they had left behind. They simply vanished, leaving behind only the echoes of destruction. For those who had once lived under the Empire's rule, there was only one certainty: the past was gone, burned away in the fire of war. The galaxy had been given a chance to rebuild, to forge something new from the wreckage of tyranny. But one undeniable truth remained. The humans had come. They had destroyed. And if any power dared to rise again in the image of the Empire, they would return.